Hamburg is a city, has always been related, of course, to the water, to the sea, but also then the river and the Ulster that is creating that particular situation of a sort of a harbor condition on the Elbe River mounting into the northern sea, but also having like a lake on the other side of the city walls, the Binnen-Ulster, and the different water systems in a more reduced way. So it's the fortification of the city and the water streams that offered this unique opportunity for Hamburg to become an important harbor and trading city. I mean, this is not a very coherent or complete way of looking into the history, but this is a 17th century, 1650 map where we see that then the city was surrounded by this water and canal system. It was also connected by these waterways, and the Nikolai Church is probably the very, very center, and then the canal is the today called Nikolai Fleet. And the bridge is already there in the 17th century or even before. This is then the so-called Holzbrücke, because at some point it was a wooden timber construction, but of course this significant bridge over the canal also changed its nature, its appearance, its construction over the course of time. And when we started the project, we really tried to grasp the essence of such a place. That's Hamburg before the war. We see the canals, we see the presence of all these different boats and ships delivering goods. And in that sense, as in many other places, I would even compare it not only to Amsterdam, but even maybe Venice. Of course, the facade to the river or to the water, to the canal, is a very important facade for a building. And this is something that maybe comes back when we look at the design in a minute, because the way we understand urban architecture, we always try to relate and connect to these different layers of history and context. So it's not only history, it's culture at large, but of course we try to establish moments of, let's say, dialogue or connections to what's there or what is the history of the place. How does a building, how does a house sit on a road that makes the crossing of the river? So what is called in German the Brückenkopf, so the bridge head, the building that forms the entry point to the passageway of the bridge. This is a very specific, and I would say an outstanding condition for an urban building, and this is what we're dealing with here. Looking at Holzbrücke, having changed over time, we see the motif of this Brückenkopf. And in looking also into different directions, Holzbrücke und Hopfenmarkt, you see here the Holzbrücke. In the back, we're looking at the market that at the time also was occupied by tent and market hall structures. And this here is our site. This is Hopfenmarkt, and what we see dominating the square is the tower, the bell tower of Nikolai Kirche. So the Nikolai Church was destroyed in the war. Also the tower that then got rebuilt, whereas the rest of the church, the nave and the whole space, continues to exist as a ruin. So it is a memorial, in that sense, a very meaningful and a very prominent place in the city. So here on Hopfenmarkt, we see different type of buildings around it. And our project belongs to this row. And what is particularly interesting is that this series, this row of buildings, forms a facade to the square. But at the same time, it also makes a facade to the Fleet. It's a sort of a canal that then joins the Hamburg harbor. And not only our project is part of that row of houses, it also forms a sort of a head. It is like the cornerstone within that system. So it is not only forming a corner on the square, but also it gives a face to the canal, and it is at the bridge. To see what this actually really means if we go into depth in such a place like in the city center of Hamburg, what discontinuity, reinvention, rupture, in a way, then also the attempts of trying to rebuild the pre-existing historic fabric, all these different and very often contradictorial attempts of building and rebuilding the city is in a very exemplary case here in front of us. Maybe this is a very nice one because again it shows the complexity. I wouldn't say necessarily complexity and contradiction, but still there is maybe also a moment of tensions, and this is intentionally so. We are looking at the corner towards the bridge. We see in the end one setback, so a socle, a cube-like volume with its head on top, and then the connecting part, like the second building part that then makes the connection along the canal. So we see one figure consisting out of two, and we start to understand, this is maybe also in this image, that this is for the office and this is for apartments. The rhythm of the columns, the vertical order of which I was speaking in the very beginning, still exists, but the rhythm is different. The further investigation was all about the proportion of these columns or pillars. It is not a classicist architecture. It is rather an attempt of giving almost expressionist attitude or form to a modern building. So we see basically it is pillars and slabs. So it's a very reduced concrete construction in the inside, reduced to a minimum. The facade is built out of brick. The facade is built out of brick on a socle, on a base, which will be executed in concrete. This is polished concrete, and then we see the bricks, and we see the rhythm of brick columns. They are rounded, so it is even more giving this plastic aspect to it. And from then on, it's all about the proportions of the column, the vertical towards the horizontal, the width of the windows. In the case of the housing, then we see that there is a loggia, so the facade, the actual windows are set back from the pillars. Of course, this facade of which I'm now speaking is also offering a specific quality from the inside, looking at it from the apartment. Here you see this is quite a simple space, the balcony loggia on the waterfront, the pillars that somehow set literally the frame to the architectural experience and the spatial condition. In an office floor, it could probably look like this. We see a strong rhythm of vertical windows, each of them covered or carried in a way by the half rounded columns of the facade. Whereas then in the interior, we are having a very simple spatial open floor plan. We are conceiving a modern contemporary building that is looking towards the future, but somehow it is rooted in all that. And in that sense, we were very much tempted, we felt very tempted to use the brick, which is not an original choice at all in general, and particularly not in Hamburg, in the context of Hamburg, that still has a very lively and I think also very productive brick culture. So there is not only tradition, but it is also a very much contemporary reality. And we were talking and are still talking to different brick manufacturers, and actually there is not far from Hamburg. And I think this is now one of the products that together with the client and everybody involved, we are evaluating, is a sort of a ring oven and ring oven, where the brick is not pushed or pulled on a sort of a conveyor belt to a conventional oven where the clay is burned and fired and burned, but rather it is a circular dating from the 18th century, a circular factory building where the fire is somehow like migrating or wandering along the circle, and by doing that over 17 days, I believe, all the clay portions that are laid out are then burned. So the idea is that our building is built of that local material that somehow belongs to the place. In that sense, this is quite a heavy and I think a beautiful decision. But then it is of course also to be contrasted with other materials. The main windows will be a timber frame windows, painted with a green paint, the green color. We are still testing now different green tones. So this is something that we, as I guess most architects, we spend a lot of time finding the right tone, obviously, and then we do bigger samples that we carry with us in order to then build even a bigger mock-up, something that will follow. Parallel to that, we also use the computer and we do these renderings, which then try to give an almost naturalistic view on some details, how the window sits then on the brickwork. And what we are actually developing here is the green frame, the greenish frame will then sit on a specially glazed green brick part that is making the transition. And that's why here we still have some samples of different types of green glazing of the brick. I was trying to give you a little bit of an understanding how complex it is to sit on this wall, the wall on the water, because in the end it's finding a very specific geometry that follows not only the line of the legal line of the plot, but also follows the logic of the poles that go deep into the ground, because it's this building in the water. So there is no linear wall, but it's a punctual system of founding the building, and the wall sits in front of it. How does this affect the curve and then also the rhythm of our main columns? And you see the denser rhythm here is where the office building stands on top, and the wider rhythm is where the loggias of the residential are. And here is actually the bridge and the entrance. It's just a detail, it's a fragment, like a bone, but I think it's important that we study these things carefully, as we do it in here with a series of plaster models, where it was more about the regular case of our building facade, the proportions of the pillars and the windows. In elevation, we can then measure precisely the proportions in the overall view from the Hopfenmarkt with the two entrances and the garage. And then here, a typical section and elevation from an office floor, where we see the rhythm of the brick that is a self-standing, full-depth brick layer in front of these columns. And we see that the brick actually needs to be formed in a rounded special format, where then we reach even more sophistication when it comes to expression and physical presence. And here we have the other facade from the river, and we see on both sides, canal, riverside, and on the Hopfenmarkt, on the square, the public square, we see that we have the one figure consisting out of two. One figure out of and then or maybe subdivided into two. Last but not least, that's somehow the front, and that's now here we somehow cutting through the bridge, looking at the front of that head, where we see how the setback works. On the canal, the facade continues straight up vertically, whereas to the square, it makes this setback. So there is also then, as we could see in the model, there is a differentiation in terms of volumetrics regarding the two different sides. And then I like this drawing very much, because here we see then all the let's say four sides plus this is in between layer to the neighbor, the party wall. But we see the different facades with the color code, showing the different components, the different types of brickwork and stone or artificial, so-called artificial stone, Kunststein, the concrete cladding of the base. So this is actually then within this very simple system of a grid with a vertical emphasis of the columns, actually leads then to a quite rich and complex system of different elements that create that one whole image. So we spoke about the proportion, we spoke about the components. It is an on-site built brick construction, which I think is quite beautiful and maybe important. Here we have some of these, more of these close-ups that I was showing you. The close-up that is giving us a precise understanding of how we try then to relate the base in polished concrete to the brick. It's a red pigmented concrete that we see here. Maybe this is coming quite close. Of course, it is also about the joint, and we like that there is let's say a strong reading of the joint. The precise color of the joint of the mortar is still to be defined. Of course, as everybody understands, it makes a huge difference whether this is closer to the brick and it creates the homogeneous continuity, or whether we want the contrast, as we are showing it on this visual very, very clearly. We've done another building for Lindt and Sprüngli in Switzerland, in Zurich, outside of Zurich. It's basically a red brick box, where then the mortar, the joints between the bricks are in the exactly same breadth as the brick is, and it makes a totally different effect, of course, than what we are looking for here. So I like these subtle differences, and I believe building in a context like the city center of Hamburg, these things particularly matter, because there we can maybe also bring back dignity to a place that lost its dignity, that got destroyed, that was and has been trying to regain its urban personality, maybe also through the means of architecture. And that was a very unstable and very, very fragile and also a difficult project, I would say, from the 1940s up to nowadays. And now there is a moment, and this is maybe particularly the case in Hamburg, also because the city architect has a strong vision of bringing back this dignity, trying to also talk about the history of the city, and to imagine architecture that somehow bridges over to that past without being, I'm repeating myself, without being nostalgic, but somehow by trying to do the real thing, to found it on even the Elbphilharmonie by Herzog d'Ömeron is literally founded on what has been existing. It's built on the foundation of the history of the city. In that case, then the big warehouses on the harbor. And here we are somehow building on the tradition of the trading houses, of the Kontorhäuser, the commercial buildings of also old Hamburg, and we are giving it a contemporary interpretation. In the best of all cases, we are building, maybe a house, an urban building that lasts. In that sense, I wouldn't say it's timeless. I think a good building belongs very strongly to a time and to a specific moment in time, but it is maybe timeless in the sense that it should be open to different forms of also adaptive usages or reuse ultimately. So in that sense, a building that is flexible and open to the future, and this is what makes it hopefully a sustainable part of a city that is again undergoing strong transformation, but rather not in the sense of disruption and complete redefinition, but rather I believe Hamburg is in a moment of change that happens in the spirit of continuity, and our project is trying to make a strong contribution to that development. And that's what I think is maybe what architecture can do. Architecture can be part of a bigger development, which is the European city, as it is the case in Hamburg. That's what we've done in our office in many projects, that we try to make that contribution in a, let's say, quite rich urban context. And we believe that and we hope that our design, they are physically lasting to a certain extent. We want them to be well built. I still believe it's a bit old-fashioned. I still believe that this matters, how a building materializes, of course, but then also its character, its expression, its physical appearance should be stable and long-lasting, as I said. And there I see a very important part of what we call sustainable or durable nowadays.